I want to get my sinus saga success story out here in case it can help anybody else. Like all my success stories, my chronic sinus saga is a story about doctors not believing me until one finally did. But I lost years of my life once again to pain and suffering that could have been avoided if doctors had actually just taken me seriously. So, part of my big health crisis in 2011, when I was just like suddenly slammed with a bunch of infections that led to an IC diagnosis and all this other stuff in 2011, I had spent several months getting recurring throat and sinus infections. I had just moved to a foreign country and started teaching young children. So I was being exposed to a ton of germs and I was under a lot of stress, not sleeping well. Just a very chaotic experience, as you can imagine. And my immune system really took a hit. Even though I was working really hard and doing all the right things to be happy and healthy, it just wasn't enough. And as usual, I can at least blame a slight portion of the blame on the birth control pill because of its effect on hormones and the fact that your mucous membranes have hormone receptors and low hormones cause dryness, and dry mucous membranes create they make it more susceptible for you to get infections. So I had like 10 years on the birth control point at this point going into it. And then I got all these infections over and over again. I got throat and sinus infections. And no one in Spain, where I was working, ever did an endoscopy, which is where they put a camera up your nose and look around. In fact, I didn't get a nasal swab or culture either. I would just like go to these doctors who worked in apartments, like in houses and apartment complexes, and they would just like look in my nose and listen to my symptoms, which I did my best to say in Spanish, and then they would just prescribe me antibiotics. At the time, I did not know how stupid that is. I did not know how unfair that is to me. I should have gotten tests. I should have had a camera go up there. I should have had samples taken and tested and been given antibiotics that specifically worked, and etc. In any case, they didn't treat me properly. They just threw antibiotics at me for months. Then I lost my job and my health insurance and my boyfriend and everything in Spain that I'd worked for. And I had to move back home with my family in 2011 because of my illness. Mainly it was my bladder, but I was just like so systemically sick with so many problems by the point that it got to this point. I was completely effed up. And then I spent the next 2 years with more sinus infections. And I remember finally seeing like an ENT in the States, in California, and it was the dad of one of my high school friends. And at first I felt really validated by him because he finally did an endoscopy and he had previously said, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with you. I don't know what's wrong with you." And then he found staph, like way hidden up in my sinuses. He found a staph infection and treated me with the right antibiotics, and I got better for a while, and then I got more sinus infections and I went back in and said I still have pain, and I think he did another endoscopy and he was like, "There's nothing wrong, you're fine, go home." And I had excruciating pain in my sinuses. I had I was coughing up dark, gross phlegm. I felt horrible. I had pressure. I had all these symptoms. And he said, "There's nothing more we can do for you." So not only was no one addressing the chronic sinus infections that I was getting, I actually had an infection again, and I wasn't even getting treatment for it. And this is in my third year. So I finally got to go see an ENT at Stanford, and the first thing he did was say, "Well, you need a CT scan. This has been going on for a long time. Like, we need to look at what's going on structurally." And thank God for that doctor. This is one of my only good doctor stories, I'm really sorry to say, but Dr. Nyack at Stanford was a godsend. When I get the CT results back, and he's like, "Well, you have a blocked maxillary sinus. Your right sinus is completely blocked and full of gunk. So that explains some of your pain." He also could see nasal polyps, which I guess had formed from all the inflammation from the frequent infections that were kind of blocking various sinus passages. I also had a deviated septum, which is quite common, but could also help explain why my colds were turning into infections. And then I had like thick turbinates, which he also recommended getting reduced in a surgery. So then I had sinus surgery where they opened up my right cheek sinus, they removed the nasal polyps, they straightened my septum, and they reduced my turbinate. And it was a pretty rough surgery. I had straws in my nose for a week or two, and I couldn't smell or taste a thing, and food tasted like cardboard, and it was a lot of pain and pressure. And I got the straws out, and it was like, I remember that meal was one of the best meals I've ever had in my life because I hadn't been able to taste or smell anything for 2 weeks at that point. And when you get your senses back like that, I mean, it was just incredible. If you ever want to diet, just like lose your sense of smell. I don't know. It made me really worried about COVID and really feel for the people who lost their sense of smell because I've experienced that for short term and it's really awful. Anyway, that next year, 2013, I traveled. I got a cold on the plane. It immediately turned into a sinus infection. This is after the surgery, and I was pretty distraught because I was like, okay, the surgery didn't work. And to top it off, while I was there, the first doctor I saw had a chip on his shoulder against Americans getting antibiotics, and he was like, prescribed me all this codeine but refused to prescribe me antibiotics, which was just cruel because I told him, like, dude, I just had sinus surgery like a few months, like 6 months ago. Like, I'm a sinus patient. Like, you need, this is a thing. I know what it is. I know what it feels like. I've had it a million times. Like, please give me antibiotics. So then I went to the next guy in the next town we went to, which was Stratford upon Avon. I remember exactly. And I told the guy, I've had this cold for 3 weeks. It's a sinus infection. And once I said the magic word, which was 3 weeks, I got antibiotics and I got better and got to enjoy the rest of my trip. But a lot of my trip was ruined from the sinus infection that the one doctor wouldn't treat. And that was my last sinus infection ever in my life, 2013. I cannot tell you how miraculous that is. It's been over a decade. I spent years of my life imprisoned by any time I'd get a cold, it would turn into a sinus infection. Then I would go to the doctor, and half the time they would send me home with nothing, or they'd send me home with antibiotics that didn't work, or they'd send me home with antibiotics, I'd take them, it would go away for a few weeks, it would come back. It was just like this horrible cycle. No one was really helping me. No one clearly was taking it seriously, and apparently I didn't have to suffer like that for years. If someone had just given me a CT scan or a proper culture or an endoscopy in the first few months, I think it all could have been avoided. So my point is, again, like, please take patients seriously. If someone's having recurring sinus infections over and over again, that's not normal. There might be something else going on up there. I was not crazy. It was not just stress. There was not just no reason for me to have shooting, stabbing pain in my sinuses and a pressure in my face for months, like I was told in the middle of my saga there. Doctors were only too easy. It was too easy for them to just kind of write me off when the technology was available. My insurance covered it. They got paid. I just don't understand the denial of proper care. Anyway, I'm sharing my story here because it's just one more example of me suffering for years with something real and physical while being told by doctors there's nothing we can do about it, nothing's really wrong with you, just go home, take some rest, manage your stress. And that wasn't the case. I had physical structural issues. There was things that could be done. Thankfully, somebody had the technology to do the proper treatment. And once I got the proper treatment, I got better. And not only did I get better, I stayed better. Even though I've had trauma and stress and difficulties in my life, they were not causing my chronic sinus infections or what was going on there.